Hello and welcome to 52 Weeks. This is week 6. And today we're going to be looking at the land use chapter 2 and expand on what we talked about last week. When we look at land use and how regulation and policies has affected how do we inhabit the land, one of the things to be looking back into, I have Philadelphia from 1682 and also New Amsterdam, New York City, 1624. So both of these plans on here, that when these were founded, there was a way of kind of slicing up the land to make it more equal in ownership or equal in size and be able to have ways of developing this. So the history of regulation really bore out of a way to inhabit the land and people having ownership of that land. The thing that they're thinking about is, as this developed, there was a need to regulate in a way of how much gets built as far as density, also construction of materials, and this is related to fire hazard and the health, safety, and welfare of inhabitants of the city. So when we have people living in high density, the potential for a catastrophe to happen is greater. We know that through various historic fires through civilization. So when you look at these things, we understand that if we look at a Philadelphia block, understanding about a 400 or 200 foot square New York block, overall 200 by 800 as these are developed. When we look at the heights of things, all this is based on heights and width of the buildings based on constructability and materials and also safety. So the heights and the volume all are regulated by these building, essentially that are not necessarily building codes, but fire safety codes that are there and then developed into building codes that we have today. The other thing that comes into play is having the Fifth Amendment in the Constitution. So that says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. There's another thing to actually help with ownership of land, and that it just can't be rightfully taken without some sort of compensation. So that gets into issues of eminent domain that pop up even within Harrisburg as the widening of 83 happens. How does a public entity be able to take back property, take back land for the use of the common good? So we're not going to argue any of that here other than that's in the Fifth Amendment, that process. So as we looked at, again, building codes, fire codes, then it developed into land use planning. And then in the 1920s, we had the U.S. Department of Commerce understanding the Standard State Zoning Enabling Act and the Standard City Planning Enabling Act. This allows some regulation in how cities were planned or managed within a mayor system or township or borough. When we look at Harrisburg, so we focus on when Harrisburg developed, originally plat of land was developed up into 1920s. So we look at the epicenter in this graphic that's drawn, and it shows how it radiates out. As that developed, the growth of Harrisburg happened up through the hill and also up through the riverfront along the river. And this was also influenced by the 1880s railroad. We got the Paxton Creek or the Paxton Canal, and the industry that developed around that, that's close to the Capitol complex. So when you can quickly look at the city and understand, anybody who's traveled around here, there's some basic bones, the framework of the city. Basic structure. We've got a central business district, the CBD, downtown. We've got a Capitol complex, which is nearby. We've got a river district, which is the long area that's in the flat plain along the river. And then we have a hill district in the bluff, the woods that are up in Allison Hill area. So you have these distinct larger pieces that you can have as a mental map of what's there. We also have the other external pieces of the Susquehanna River, again, the railway and the Paxton Canal or Creek. So all these areas. So whenever you want to talk about the city, we can actually see it as a mental model on these 7 parts that are here. Another thing to consider is as we're wandering around the city, you're going to see some formal elements that begin to draw out based on the Capitol complex with east and west focus on State Street. Where do they end up? The eastern side of State Street is at the following the whole way to the Reservoir Park. The west side goes down to the riverfront and ends in Kunkel Plaza. Another thing to be thinking about is as we expanded, and Harrisburg expanded from the Capitol complex, we're going to go these growth periods that happen up the river into the river district, ending in William Penn campus as kind of an exclamation point or an end cap that's talked about in the plan. And that goes the whole way to the east side of the cemetery and John Harris. Residential development, as we said earlier, radiating out of the central business district. As people were living and working, they stayed. We didn't have vehicles back in the early days, 1800s of Harrisburg, until we got the trolley car, the streetcar, and moving along great distances. People tend to be close to where they work, which actually is not far from what we're actually experiencing in most of our cities now. The live and work ideas, living and working is close together. So that's one thing we look at when we understand residential development. Is there's a kind of a return back, circling back to living where you work. But you can see this development both in north of the river and the east of the hill area. When we look at the overall neighborhoods, this is a great image showing where some of the neighborhoods are. Yes, this is an incomplete list. There's more sub-neighborhood, but we look at the moment, there's 30 of them in here. To actually start to think about neighborhood groups that need to be pulling together and understanding what that identity is and what their area plan should be, how they should be developing.